What's happening, folks? Welcome back to Deckard Unicorn. My name's Martin.
And my name's Shona. And right now we are about 7 months into the COVID-19 pandemic. And our days of high adventure are currently on hold.
It feels like we're living between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the years of the rise of the sons of Arius.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like that. Yeah.
Well, people have found ways, creative ways, to get themselves through this.
Like, right, really cheesy intros.
And they've found some hobbies and goals to shoot for. Have you got any interesting goals you shoot for?
Ugh, nothing out of the ordinary. Try to exercise a little bit more. Maybe crush my enemies, see them driven before me, and hear the lamentations of their women.
It's quite a list of objectives.
Absolutely.
But I've heard that's best in life.
Well, if you do believe the protagonist of our next movie...
Yes. Conan the Barbarian. So yes, today we're doing another terrible intro, but also Conan the Barbarian, which is a 1982 high adventure sword and sorcery movie from director John Milius, from a script written by Milius and Oliver Stone, and of course it stars Big Arnie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sandahl Bergman, Max von Sydow, James Earl Jones, Sven Ole Thorsen, Mako, Jerry Lopez, and a bunch of other people that we'll get to later on.
But we're also bringing you a special double header. As well as Conan the Barbarian, we're going to discuss another film from that time, Red Sonja!
So this film went through the hands of a number of directors before it got started. Oliver Stone wrote it, but he was also sort of tacked on to direct it at first, and obviously didn't get the job. I think Ridley Scott was even involved at one point as well.
I think Ridley Scott turned it down.
Yeah, he turned it down, that's right, yeah. But yeah, Oliver Stone, Ridley Scott, and then eventually you come to John Milius, who I think was most famous at this point for Apocalypse Now, the screenplay. I think he was nominated for an Oscar.
Absolutely. So apparently what happened was the producers had seen a rough cut of Arnold Schwarzenegger's Pumping Iron. So that came out in like 1977. It's a classic.
The Pump!
If you've not seen it, you need to check it out. Some quality early Arnie footage there. So they'd seen a rough cut and they'd seen Arnold Schwarzenegger for the first time, and they were kind of blown away by his stature for one thing, but also his personality. Like, the guy is got a big personality. And they were like, well, what can we put this guy in? And that's when they came to Conan.
Aye, and he's perfect fit for this. Like, Schwarzenegger was basically born to play that role. He looks exactly like the Frank Frazetta comic books. So I'm sure everybody's aware that it's a Robert E. Howard book, and Robert E. Howard was a little bit of a lunatic. I think he supposedly,
had some problems.
I think he supposedly boarded himself up at home in Texas. I think is where he's from. He boarded himself into his own house, and he felt like there was a presence behind him. It was a dark shadow, and he thought it was Conan telling him what to do, and he was going to cleave him in two if he didn't finish writing this book. So he didn't get much sleep, and sort of wrote all these pages. And the next day, he's written most of Conan's story, and just kept doing it every day to try and chase away this demon that was behind him.
Wow.
So yeah, the guy definitely had issues. But...
some demons.
So yeah, Oliver Stone wrote the script, and John Milius came in and added his layers to it.
Well, I think it took them quite a while from their first meeting with Schwarzenegger. I think it was about 5 years before they managed to get this project off the ground.
Yeah, that's right. It was the 70s, I think. It was Pressman, wasn't it? Edward Pressman that met up with Schwarzenegger, and it was just an idea they had down the line, which eventually came to fruition at one point. I think Oliver Stone actually wanted a more like a James Bond type franchise. He was expecting this to be like one every couple of years. Schwarzenegger would take up the sword again and become Conan for a new movie. But Milius' idea, I think, was a trilogy.
Wow, okay.
Based on different aspects. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was thinking of a trilogy, and they kind of did get a trilogy, because you get Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Destroyer, and then Red Sonja, which we're going to do later. Clearly that wasn't a Conan film.
Technically not, but...
Pretty much, in all but name, he was, Conan. So Oliver Stone's original script was influenced by Dante's Inferno, and he had like mutants all over. Like, he was into those kind of DNA splicing things at the time, I think. So he wanted all these mutants from all over the planet, all different species and races, and it seemed like it was going to just be too big. I think when Dino De Laurentiis came on, a notoriously frugal producer, didn't want to spend the money on it, so it became more and more realistic. And I think Milius was more along the lines of having it more realistic as well. So, and you can see that in the production design and the weapon quality and all that kind of stuff. It was all things that he felt would work in the real world. And we'll get to the technical specifics of that later on. But yeah, I'm really glad they did go with the more realistic, grounded approach. There's a point in this film where it could quite easily tip over into too much fantasy and silliness. And I really like the serious tone that it carries all the way through. The effects and technique that they had at their disposal at that point in time allowed them to do certain things, and I think if they'd extended themselves trying too hard, to match something like Star Wars or whatever, it might have ended up becoming silly. There's only certain moments in it that come off as cheesy for me anyway. I still think it's quite a dark and sort of serious sword and sorcery epic, unlike a lot of the ones that ripped it off, that came later. There was a whole bunch of films that appeared after this and they were all largely terrible, but pretty much the same idea. Strong muscular man, strong muscular woman,
swords fighting,
usually a minority sidekick and all that kind of thing. And some of them are just absolutely god awful.
So I have another confession to make, and it is I saw Conan the Barbarian for the first time this weekend.
Crazy, I know.
So that's I feel like that's like a sacking offence in this household.
That is actually a sacking
all the
offence.
times that Martin has suggested watching Conan, I've kind of not been up for it. I had this impression in my head that it would be Arnold Schwarzenegger just kind of grunting about, going 9 and clubbing people over the head, and not a lot of story.
Well, it kind of is. It's not too far off that.
But actually, I was really pleasantly surprised. It was so much more than what I was anticipating. I mean, this is a big film. It's got a big soundtrack. It's got massive sets. It's an epic, and it's so enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I think Milius was influenced by Vikings. It's like a 1950s film, Kirk Douglas. And he wanted something on that scale. And that's more like you would call a sword and sandals style epic.
Oh, but this was a sword and sandal.
Oh, well, kind of. Yes, I get where you're going there. I like that. Yeah, but again, I like the idea that the kind of supernatural elements of it, the wizardry and all these kind of more fantastical elements they're quite low in it, they're quite low in the mix, so to speak, and they don't overpower it. It's really just about a man who can fight, and he's got revenge on his mind, and he's going to get it whichever way it comes, that kind of thing, so. But there's all these fantastical elements laced within it. Ancient cults, snake cults, all these things are just gold when you're when you're thinking about bad guys and villains.
And James Earl Jones.
Exactly.
What a guy.
Coming right off the back of Darth Vader, I think he'd been in Empire Strikes Back as well. Clearly he's only the voice, but that intimidating voice, and as a man he's really intimidating as well, and he was the perfect foil for Schwarzenegger here, like Thulsa Doom. What a name as well, that's the best name ever.
Such a baddie.
It just sounds like a comic book villain. And I also like how it taps into the idea of alternate histories, like the Atlanteans and all these things. If you believe a lot of those conspiracy theories about first Adam and ancient races and lizards and all these kind of things, I think a lot of them come back to this root of all these ancient civilizations and cultures being the root of all evil. But yeah, absolutely, I love it. I love that idea. It's really, really good when you see it in a film, and they sort of mine that quite well.
Definitely. And they've definitely gone out of their way to create a real backstory that really gives it authenticity. They've got repeating motifs, they've got like a whole architecture and everything, and I think in the behind the scenes they talk about creating almost like branding. Yeah,
exactly. The snake cult's almost got its own brand. There's this kind of continuity of symbolism and stuff like that. I think that was really important. But the other thing that jumps out at you initially as a first impression is the music. Like you said earlier, Basil Poledouris' score in this is so good. Like, he's got all these really cool choices of instrumentation. There's a lot of bells, gongs, metallic sounds and all that kind of thing. And again, there was this idea of prehistory. They were inspired by, what would this sound like? This is before music, really, that we know it. How can you sort of recreate that, give that impression? And clearly they have to use modern instruments to sort of make it, but yeah, it's definitely got its own vibe and its own flavour, and I think it was a perfect choice. They had thought of Morricone initially, who did Red Sonja, which we'll talk about later. Yeah, I think Basil Poledouris was a great choice. He did the RoboCop soundtrack as well, which again features lots of metallic sounds and stuff like that. That kind of anvil sound. That's when it's in heavy rotation. I really love this soundtrack, especially like the kind of bells and cymbals and all that kind of stuff. And gives it almost like a kind of Middle Eastern flavour.
It does. There's sounds in it that really remind me of soundtracks from really old epic films that are set in like Egypt and things like that.
That's exactly it. Like, again, classic sword and sandals epics, definitely. Like religious biblical epics and stuff like that. It's got that flavour, and yeah, I really, really like it. Okay, so the main man, in this film is Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yay!
Yeah. And this wasn't his first movie. He'd been in Hercules New York, that absolute classic.
And then he came back.
And he'd obviously been in Pumping Iron and a few other things. But yeah, this was kind of like this is his big breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said in the intro, he was basically made for this. Like Schwarzenegger, like given his background, who he was, what he looked like, he just fit the profile of Conan perfectly because he just had to be a body, a physicality, a presence, able to hold your attention on the screen. He didn't necessarily have to be able to act very well as long as he could do the physical stuff. And again, he wasn't going to speak too much, so he's always had that thick accent. But again, because Conan, the idea they were going for was like this Northman, like he was very inspired by Viking mythology. So the accent didn't really matter because you could say, okay, it's supposed to be like this old Germanic, Northern European or whatever. It's not of a time. It looks like it's of a time from a history that could have been, so none of these things really mattered, and that plays perfectly in Schwarzenegger's favour.
And actually, even though he already had that amazing physical presence, he was he Mr. Universe at this time? Did that come later?
He'd already been Mr. Universe 6 times, I think. It was a record at the time. Pumping Iron was his 6th Mr. Universe or Olympia. I can't remember which one it was. One of those 2 titles anyway. But yeah, he was the best of the best, and a lot of people believe that he shouldn't have won the last one. It should have been Lou Ferrigno, but
controversial.
Controversial, yeah.
But despite that, he still actually had to train for about 18 months for this role. Obviously there was a lot of sword play, a lot of horse riding, but as well as that, they kind of needed some, although he already had that bulk, they needed him to be super athletic as well for this part. So he did a lot of, as I said, horse riding, but he also had to do lots of calisthenic type things like climbing ropes and improving his athleticism as well as his strength.
Well, that's the thing, he's a warrior, so he's going to have to move fairly well, fairly
run
quickly and lithe. He's going to have to be pretty flexible. And that's one of the things that a lot of bodybuilders, especially the old school ones, they'd never really had that. It wasn't really about flexibility, it was just about pure mass and size. It's not to say that some of them weren't, maybe some of them were really well trained. But I think Schwarzenegger in his younger days also did ballet and things like that. When he was actually a bodybuilder, he got instruction, and not to say he did ballet, but he got instruction in how to pose, and how to hold his body and all those kind of things. So there was dancers that would come in and show him poses and how to hold himself. He did probably do some flexibility work, but it definitely wasn't like a major part of his regimen, I don't think. But now it had to be, simply because, if you want to look like a proper warrior, you're going to have to be able to flow from one movement to the next. And he does have issues, you can see that he's not physically so well attuned to it. His body shapes and stuff, you can tell, are not very good. He doesn't make very good shapes. His base isn't very good. His stance isn't very good. He looks like he could push him over at points when he does some of the sword kata. And he especially struggles with the Japanese katana. It looks really weird and flimsy on him. Yeah. you can see that it's maybe just a little bit too light maybe for him.
Yeah, do you think that is the size thing?
Possibly. It might just be going at it too hard and it's too light and it makes it look flimsy. And he's not giving it the weight that it deserves.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That idea of giving the object the weight to make it look like it's heavier or it's more unwieldy and you're just controlling it. He's just kind of thrown it around. But when you've got the broadsword, it looks much better. He looks far more comfortable. And he does the classic web of death maneuver, where you've got that swing that goes around the shoulders and around the head. And yeah, he looks pretty good. And towards the end of the film, it looks great. Like I said, the combat in it had to be that really grim and brutal and gruesome way. It didn't need to be polished. No. It just had to look realistic.
Proper brawls.
Yeah, it's a proper brawl. Nothing's clean. It's just wherever you can hit someone.
Hacking people's heads off and stuff.
And it's going to do damage, those size of blades and all that kind of thing. All you need to do is make contact. And at that point, there's no armour, really. It's just leather and fur and stuff like that. So you're generally going to injure someone pretty badly. But I like the way his character's built up, he's treated like an animal, he's forced to fight from a young age, all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of all he knows. All he's got in his mind is revenge. I have to get this guy who killed my parents. Well, he killed his mother, and it was his kind of bodyguards, Thorgrim and Rexor, that were responsible for his dad.
And the dogs.
And the dogs as well, yeah, they got him in the back and the dogs kind of finished him off. But I like the way he kind of converses and just grunts and nods at first,
I have to wonder as well, so it seems like he hones his power and his strength on that big wooden grinding machine.
Yeah, the Wheel of Pain.
The Wheel of Pain. And he's been on that for years and years, and I wondered when when he was set free from that to walk, and he walks away, like, did he find himself a little bit dizzy, kind of walking in a circle? Like, surely he's going to have like one side more bigger and developed than the other. Like, I don't know.
No, I think he's pretty well balanced on the wheel of pain. But yeah, it's a great sequence as well,
It's
a great,
really cool,
and a great set, you know, which we'll get to later.
It's a good montage.
It is a good montage.
Everyone needs a montage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I love that. You know, it starts off as the kid. You know, you see the child's feet, and it just gradually, as it goes round, you see that the legs are getting bigger and all that kind of stuff, and then eventually you've got that moment where it's him pushing it, and you know he's just going to look up through his helmet here and show that jaw.
And you almost want to cheer when
Exactly.
this young boy grows up into Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
So Conan's eventual partner in crime is played by Sandal Bergman, and she kicks absolute ass as Valeria.
Yeah, she's amazing.
She's so cool. So she's like 6 foot.
She's a Valkyrie.
So she was like 6 foot tall. She was a dancer.
Yeah.
So she already had this great physical presence.
She was in all that jazz.
She was also in Xanadu.
Xanadu?
Which
What?
I've not seen, and I'm probably not going to check out. But if anyone's interested in that, before she made her break here, and again, she went through that same training, the swordsmanship, the horse riding, and I think she absolutely kicks ass in this film. Her poise is great, her stance look fantastic.
But again, that's the difference. We talked about that with Schwarzenegger. That's the difference. She was a dancer. She know how to actually use her body, but specifically her body and movement.
Yes.
You know, it's all right standing still and making a pose and making it look good, you know, but when someone asks you to jump or run or, you know, bounce off something and then land and look good while you're doing it, that's a different skill altogether.
Completely.
And Schwarzenegger just doesn't have that in this. And I think they've got him doing as little of that as possible.
Yeah.
But she's doing all of it. You know, there's moments where she's doing the choreography and she's running up walls and she's hitting people and ducking and blocking and jumping.
Her swordplay looks fantastic. It looks really
does.
strong, totally believable. I mean, obviously, I know absolutely zero about swordplay. So if anyone out there is like, actually, sword expert, it was crap, do let us know. But to me, as an average person on the street, I thought she really pulled it off and it looked fantastic.
Well, I mean, that's the thing you can tell, though. I don't think you need to be an expert to see when someone is not comfortable doing something. And she looks fully comfortable. Yes, I think there's points where she is holding back a little bit, and you can see that the stunt man is making it work, you know, by maybe jumping a bit closer or throwing themselves out of the way more, you know, that kind of thing. But I think she does a fantastic job. It's no, like, I think Schwarzenegger comes off worse, really, to be honest, in some of the parts. He looks good later on in the final battle specifically, which again I think is more to his strength. It's just kind of like pick up what you've got and swing it at people.
So Sandal actually won a Golden Globe for this film. It was the only sort of big award, I think. So she won a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which I think was probably quite well deserved.
I think so, yeah. I mean, we said earlier, Valkyrie, we were saying that. That's what John Milius is.
She's a Valkyrie.
She's a Valkyrie.
Valkyrie.
If you listen to the commentary, you'll just hear John Milius saying that she's a Valkyrie about 100 times. It's hilarious. There's a video on YouTube actually of Arnold Schwarzenegger and John Milius talking about it, and it's just the funniest thing ever. Schwarzenegger does a great impression of Dino De Laurentiis. It's just hilarious. And
because of her stature, so she's 6 foot tall, they couldn't find any stunt women to work for her. She did have to do everything by herself. Yeah. Sandal Bergman also nearly lost a finger.
She did, that's right.
During one of the fight scenes. So she was saying that she was fighting with one of the extras who wasn't a stuntman, which is maybe slightly concerning anyway. And he did the wrong move and caught her finger, and her finger was nearly
severed,
cut off.
I think he said it was a parry, so it's kind of like a...
Is that like a basic sword?
Well, it's kind of like a blow. It's like a deflecting blow almost, a parry. It's like when you deflect something away. So the sword's going to slide as it does that, as it slides away. So the sword slid down and then hit her on the hand.
Oh, I'm actually holding my fingers together just now, just in case. Yeah.
She's sensational. She looks great in it. And I don't think they could have got anybody more perfect, really, to be honest. And I think it works in her favour that there's no stunt double.
Definitely.
She would have been hard to double for. Like, she's very physically specific.
Yes.
You know, she's got a very definite look, and you would have seen a mile away if she was being doubled by somebody, especially in those days. A lot of the time they even replaced women with men, stunt men and stuff like that, and vice versa sometimes, you know, just silly why they would do it, but they did, simply because the actor would cost too much insurance-wise for them to do it, so... It was whoever looked most like the person, they would just get him to do it as far as the stunt team's concerned. So, yeah, I think that works out well for her that she did her own stunts because it makes her more convincing as a character as well. So the big bad is quite literally the big bad, big bad snake, is Thulsa Doom, and he's played by James L. Jones, who's just such an amazing presence in this.
He brings so much weight to this film. He really does.
He really does.
But so subtly.
We've seen the interview where they talk about the look they were after for James L. Jones, and John Milius said he wanted the Thulsa Doom to look like someone from a race that had died or was gone extinct, and he was the only one left. So he had this idea of James L. Jones, because he had a very kind of specific face, and then they gave him blue eyes, and then they straightened his hair. They gave him straight hair as well. So, he looked like almost a combination of races. And he was supposed to be kind of like one of these last Atlanteans or something like that, So, and obviously he was head of the snake cult and had the ability to transform into a huge snake. And it's such an amazing character design from top to bottom. The hair, the look, the armour that he wears, with the dual swords and all that kind of stuff. And he's got all the sort of snake motifs everywhere, and the eyes are constantly looking at like all over his armour.
And he seems to have this ability to kind of entrance people, almost get snake charmed by him.
It's like reverse snake charming. It's like the snake doing the charming.
And there's moments, there's a lot of points in this film where there's no dialogue and just long intense looks or panning shots of landscapes and things. But in these moments, an actor like James Earl Jones really brings dramatic tension into those times.
Exactly. One of my favourite scenes in the movie comes back to that exact idea where he almost hypnotises Conan's mother. He approaches her in the village when the village has been raided, and she's kind of standing alone at the end, and she has Conan's hand, and he walks up to her, and he does that thing with his eyebrows, almost like a kind of, it's okay, everything's going to be fine.
I totally thought, I hadn't seen it. If you've not seen this film, we're going to spoil it for you. I thought he was being like, it's okay, hen. You're safe.
Well, that's exactly
Everything's fine.
He plays her, and she puts her guard down. She's got the drop on him. She's got her sword raised, and he could get injured. He would most likely beat her. I don't know what he's like as a combatant, but she's got the drop on him. She's got her sword raised, and this is his way of sort of disarming her. So, he uses that thing with his eyebrows. She sort of drops her guard. He turns away, looks at her, gives her one last look over the shoulder, and then swings around and cuts her head off.
I was so shocked.
Yeah. It's that sequence. It's glorious. It's beautiful.
It is.
But it's also horrific.
Horrifying.
It's like the murder of the Waynes in Batman.
Yeah.
It's like right before his eyes, this young kid sees his father killed in the snow by the dogs, ripped apart. And then his mother is just beheaded. And you've got this sequence where the body just falls away and her hand just gradually leaves his.
It's so sad.
And the boy just sits and looks at the hand.
This empty hand.
The empty hand, yeah. It's just, it's heartbreaking.
It is.
But it's such a brilliantly constructed scene. It really works brilliantly as a cinematic moment. John Milius is a very, very good director. He's not done a lot of stuff like screenwriter. He's done more. But yeah, he really knows how to compose a shot as well. And I think for the character of Thulsa Doom, Milius and Stone basically combined all the biggest shits from from history. And so there's elements of all sorts of people in there, dictators and so on, to make him this really evil, vile presence. And yeah, the moment where he transforms into a snake is just...
Oh, it's so good. I was just so surprised at how good the effect looked.
I think when you see him on the throne, I love the way he just sits on his throne. He's got both his fists clenched and pointing towards each other. He looks like a statue. Yeah. He's just sitting there monitoring what's going on. And this is at the point where everyone's drinking the split pea and ham hand soup. Because you find out that the cult are actually like eating people. It's like some kind of weird Soylent Green moment.
It is, and actually the soup's green.
And the soup's green, and that's what John Milius called it, split pea and hand. Because you see a lot of hands and eyeballs and stuff. The guy's mixing it. Oh, it's so good. But yeah, he's a bit of a vile person, Mr. James L. Jones. So Thulsa Doom's two main bodyguards.
It's henchmen, if you will.
Henchmen, yeah, exactly. So Ben Davidson is the first one. He's the tallest one.
He's Bebop.
He's Bebop. And they've both got great helmet hair.
They really do.
The helmet hair game is fantastic.
And the moustache game is on point. Yes.
Ben Davidson's moustache is fantastic. But he was an American football player. He was a tight end American football player. He's a super big guy.
He's enormous.
He's enormous.
Was he about 20 foot tall?
Yeah, I think so. 21. But yeah, he was perfect physical presence for this. And then the other one is Sven-Ole Thorsen, who is Schwarzenegger's friend. He was also in a bunch of other things, Running Man. Pretty much everything Schwarzenegger's ever been in. Red Heat, you name it. He pops up. But yeah, he was Thorgrim. So they were Rexor and Thorgrim. Two hilarious helmet-haired assailants.
Oh man, the hair in this is quite spectacular.
So rounding out the good guys is Jerry Lopez, and he wasn't even an actor.
No, he was a surfer. With like the
hilarious.
and again with the best moustache game.
He's got a good tash. He's got a good tash, but his is based more on Mongol warrior.
But I think he had that kind of before, didn't he? Like, was that not part of the surfer's look?
Well, maybe, I don't know.
Like, not a surfer look, but his
I
look.
thought the moustache was added.
I don't know. We'll
because
need
it
to
made him
look
look
that
more
up.
kind of Mongol for some reason.
Maybe we'll follow up on that point.
But yeah, he was just John Milius's friend, and I think when they were reading, as they call it, people. They were trying to find someone to play the part, and he just kept referring to, we're just looking for the guy that looks like Jerry Lopez, so why don't we get Jerry Lopez? So they got Jerry Lopez, and he came in and he went to Mako. So Mako is the wizard in this, the old Japanese actor. He's an amazing Mako. I absolutely love him. He was in The Big Brawl. It's a Jackie Chan movie from 1980. I think I mentioned it before, but he's
and we'll mention it again.
And we will mention it again. But he's a great actor, Japanese actor, and he reminded me of Kikuchiyo from the Seven Samurai in this. You know, he's like, that's Toshiro Mifune's character, because he's got that kind of manic energy.
Yeah,
he's
definitely.
Like jumping around, he's always like annoyed. But
inconvenienced by them.
Inconvenienced. But yeah, so Jerry Lopez went to Mako's acting school, and he said it was like a really humiliating experience because he wasn't an actor, he was a surfer, and you know, just put him through his paces. But I think he's great in this. I did not know he wasn't an actor.
No, I didn't either.
It's not like he stands out as being like super amazing, but he doesn't stand out as being not a good actor.
No, exactly.
He plays the part really well, so kudos to Jerry Lopez. So Conan's father is played by William Smith, and even though he's only in it for a wee bit, again, he's another guy with like a great presence. You know, you see that moment at the beginning where he lays out to Conan about Crom, you know, the god. This is kind of laying out the mythology and the religion that these people believe in.
And telling him the only thing you can really trust is steel.
Steel. Yeah, I love that. I love that whole exchange at the beginning. And then he kind of comes a cropper quite early on, which I was quite annoyed about. Always have been.
It's like the
Even though I know
Sean
it's
Bean
coming.
moment in Game of Thrones.
Even though I know it's coming, I'm always like, oh, damn. But yeah, William Smith buys it quite early. But he was in, do you remember him in Maniac Cop? He was in Maniac Cop.
I don't remember Maniac Cop, but yes.
He was in Any Which Way You Can as well. No? Clint Eastwood?
Oh, it's been a long time.
Sort of street fighting movie. He was in that. Oh yeah, he was the bad guy. Well,
Let's put
the
that
bad
on
guy,
the
good
list.
guy. That's a good double bill, by the way.
Okay.
Every Which Way But Listen, Any Which Way You Can. Good boxing manoeuvres.
Look out for that. It's coming to a podcast near you in 2021.
But yeah, William Smith, great wee he gets a great wee part in this. And then you've got Max von Sydow as well, which is just, again, bananas. Like, we talked about that in Flash Gordon. It's like, I don't think even John Milius believed he was going to get Max von Sydow for this part.
Can you imagine like going to these giant stars and being like, right, so I've got this plan, there's going to be swords, there's going to be wizards. Yeah, it just,
But he
nuts.
thought it was really theatrical, and that's why I was really drawn to it. And also the fact that it was probably only a couple of days of shooting. You know, as King Osric, he's in there just to give Conan, Valeria, and Jerry Lopez.
He gives them their mission. He's like,
to get
he's
the
like
daughter
the
back.
king in Spaceballs, who's like,
Yes, exactly.
rescue my daughter. But also he has a really lovely line in the film. He says, so he's talking about, you know, never mind all these riches and things like that. All that's left is a father's love for his child.
Yeah.
And that's a good one.
Yeah, it's quite touching. And funnily enough, he was actually supposed to die in this.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, like he was supposed to die. He was supposed to get assassinated by two of his bodyguards who had turned to the snake cult. And as soon as Conan disappears, they get into him. And it was quite a brutal slaying, actually. You know, it looked pretty bad.
So apparently as well, they actually had to go back and edit this film because it was too violent and gory. So actually, the violence in it has been toned down a little bit. Yeah. But apparently, if you get the Japanese version, a lot of that's still in it. So we need to look out for that.
Yeah, because the version we've got has got cuts in it. You can tell there's a few moments where it jumps a bit too early, and then people are in different positions. And it's like, oh, what happened there? And I thought I had the uncut version, but clearly not. So yeah, we need to have a look for that. So we talked a little bit about the snake cult symbolism. I think that's just amazing, and the landscape that everything is set in is so good. I think they started off in Yugoslavia, and it's at the same time where there was that kind of civil war going on, so they had to move it, and they moved into Spain, which is I think where they also filmed Red Sonja. Yeah, the snake cult symbolism is great, and you've got these amazing sets. See that set that?
Yeah, the set on the hillside, the kind of temple.
Yeah, that's
stairway.
That's just amazing. But it looks so real. It looks like it's been there for centuries. Yeah. That's kind of the effect. And the production designer was Ron Cobb, and he'd done Alien as well. But this is just like one step beyond.
I wonder if it's still there. I wonder if you go to that mountainside if it's still there.
I don't think they're allowed to do that. I think they have to tear them down.
Yeah, and restore them to
Plus,
their...
I mean, it looks like it's built out of stone, but it would have been built out of wood and all sorts of stuff, and probably would have like been destroyed by now anyway. And there'd have been so many people going to visit it.
That's true.
It'd be covered in graffiti and stuff.
Have you seen there's a documentary about the graveyard from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly that's been restored?
That's right. Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I wonder if there would be a similar thing for the epic staircase from Conan. So if anyone knows if the epic staircase has survived, give us a shout out.
I don't think it survived, but there's bound to be someone who knows the location of where it was built. There might be some part of it, some aspect of it that's still there.
A little snake,
a
little concrete snake.
Maybe a foundation or something. But yeah, I love the practicality and the production design. You know, everything had to work, as I said earlier. John Milius said he wanted everything to feel like it was part of a real world.
Yeah.
And it's only a little bit removed from our own world because of the fantasy elements.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
like people turning into snakes. There's a bit of magic and wizardry and witchcraft and stuff in there as well. But it all does feel very realistic, and it looks a little bit like places you would recognise, like the Middle East.
You do feel like you're watching historical events.
Yeah,
as silly as that sounds.
It does have the feeling of a sword and sandals epic, but you know, they've got this extra fantasy layers on top. But some of the sets, like the Tree of Woe, is just class. It's so good, and it's just a dead tree.
So I've got a good fact about that.
Have
so
you?
It was actually built on like a rotating platform because they filmed it over so many days, and it was actually outside, so that the shadows were always cast the same way. They had to keep turning it.
I see.
So
that's very clever.
It's pretty cool.
That's the kind of thing. That's the kind of things you don't even have to think about nowadays.
I know.
Just like, it's just fine. Just CGI it in,
Exactly.
and the light will come from that position, and it'll be fine. But yeah, the Tree of Woe and the Wheel of Pain, they're fairly simple sets as far as like there's nothing else around them. They're just this one object in the middle of nowhere. But I think that lends more scale to it.
Definitely.
You know, like
also giving them names like the Tree of Woe and the Wheel of Doom, like that really lends something to it as well. If it was just like the tree or the big wheel, wouldn't be quite so menacing.
You're going to the tree. That sounds alright.
That sounds good.
That
We
sounds no
holiday.
bad.
You're going to the Tree of Doom. No.
I think the fact as well that they used a lot of real snakes. They had a snake wrangler, there's a doctor of snakes.
Dr. Snake.
Dr. Snake. So this doctor gave everybody a snake to become comfortable with, so that everybody would feel sort of okay in their presence, and the snakes also wouldn't get spooked. But you know, there's that brings you to the sequence, one of the effects where Conan fights the snake in the pit the first time, and it's amazing.
The giant snake.
That giant snake looks so good.
Again,
it looks like a real snake.
It
looks enormous.
Genuinely really surprised at the effects in this film, and like the practical effects and the in-camera effects, as well as the sort of added effects later.
Yeah.
Were genuinely really good, and they really stood the test of time. The
Certainly
snakes look fantastic. Usually things like that you can tell from the skin and the texture and the sort of sheen that's not quite right, but genuinely did a really good job here.
I think the way it moves is so good, and there's only one point when you can tell it's a mechanical that's rigged, you know, because its neck's bent at a weird angle. It looks kind of almost like 90
and you can
degrees.
see a weird...
It's just, that's the only weird bit. Maybe it's because they had the guy there who was like a snake expert, and he was able to then give like hints and tips, like it moves like this,
How
it
it
looks
would
like that,
move,
or you know, they had somebody to bounce ideas off, you know, who knew doesn't look like that, you know, a snake doesn't move like that, you know, it would do this, it would do that. But those effects look absolutely fantastic. And I love the idea that you had this big thing that they could actually fire arrows into and hack at.
Yeah.
You know, there's that moment where Jerry Lopez's character fires the arrows, and it turns out that was John Milius firing real arrows at the snake.
Just above Arnold Schwarzenegger's head. Like, actually firing real arrows above someone's head. Like, that's
no way.
Pretty hardcore. You could not do that now.
Yeah, there's no way Schwarzenegger would allow that now.
No.
You know, because he's such a big star, he'd be like, no chance. Like, he's barely on set these days, like, for anything he does. You know, famously, like, Batman and Robin, I think he was only in the film for about 10 minutes, and the rest was, like, his stunt double. You know, like, he's second. He just did everything for him, pretty much. He only appeared when it was a close-up
Of
line.
his face.
Yeah. Nowadays, he would never allow something like that, you know, but then he would be just like, that's fine, let's just do it, you know, because I think he knew this was going to be his big break. But yeah, John Milius firing arrows, and then Schwarzenegger hacks his head off, and it's just, you can see that it looks like a real thing.
Yeah, and
you know,
Schwarzenegger's really
really going at
wrestling
it.
with
Yeah.
it. You can see that it's got weight, that it's got...
Yeah.
And I don't know that, no disrespect to Arnie, but especially at this stage in his career, I don't know if he would have had the sort of body awareness and body acting, physical acting, to act that the snake had weight. So I think that probably really helped the whole sequence Another effect that I thought worked really well was at the point in the desert when they were trying to save Conan from the spirits taking him away, like from him dying, basically. Right, yeah. And these demons, these ghostly apparitions, are literally fighting for his life.
They were all hand-drawn. You just don't see that kind of stuff anymore. And again, even looking at that now, I just thought it was a great effect because, I mean, it's a demon from another realm that's coming to take this body. Who's to say what it looks like? They would look odd and at odds with what you're expecting. So I think it was good that they chose that particular way of doing it, and they had this kind of ethereal, ghostly quality to them because they're kind of wispy.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It looked like they're made out of vapour and smoke, and it was just such a good effect. And I think that whole sequence was inspired by a story from Kwaidan, and it's called Hoichi the Earless. Hoichi the Earless, I think it's called. It's a ghost story in a Japanese movie called Kwaidan, where the character gets all those kind of things written on his face, you know, and a spell to protect him.
Okay.
But they forget his ears.
Oh no.
And the demons rip his ear off, which is why he's called Hoichi the Earless. But yeah, I think they took inspiration from that, but Schwarzenegger's like fully covered. And again, it's just supposed to be like some kind of incantation that's going to protect him against the demons trying to take him. But I think it's the idea that he is dying and this is the other side coming to get him.
And I think at that point as well, Valeria kind of makes a bit of a pact, a bit of a deal.
She does.
To save his soul.
She does.
And that sequence, along with some of their relationship dynamics, I think must have really inspired the characters of Khal Drogo and Daenerys in Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
I think there's a
absolutely.
lot of crossover there, and that kind of same thing about a bargain for his life. Although obviously it didn't end so well. Well, in this case, it didn't end so well for Valeria in the end. So her demise, she put down to the trade she made for his life.
The fight at the end is another one of the kind of technical achievements of this movie. I think John Milius was a military tactician. Like, he was in the army, but I don't actually know what he did as far as his rank or whatever was concerned, but apparently he was a military tactician. And he set out how this final battle should go, you know, where they would set up, what the kind of defensive measures they would use, all these kind of things, for the particular numbers they were facing, all the traps. And it reminded me of First Blood, you know, especially that trap that catches Finoli Thorson.
Spikes through
the guy gets a spike through his legs in First Blood.
Horrible.
And he's just kind of pinned. But yeah, in this one, Sven-Ole Thorsen gets a massive spike through the chest. It's a wee bit more brutal, a wee bit more extreme, because obviously it's supposed to kill him. I think there's a wee bit of a furore about the horse, wasn't there? Like, Milius said that the horse that fell down the hill with the stuntman on it, some people, the animal rights people, believed that the horse was hitting those sticks.
Stabbed,
Yeah, it was getting stabbed by those sticks, but they were all made of rubber. Because he pointed out to them that the stuntman was falling down there first. You know? The stuntman never got stabbed, so the horse never got stabbed. It is a pretty hefty fall for the horse, there's no doubt about it.
And there are a few points in this film where it looks like the horses have been tripped. And I don't know enough about animal handling to know, but it did look pretty... Yeah,
I think there's a moment that's cut out where Schwarzenegger actually cuts the legs out from under a horse, you know, as someone charges at him. You don't see it in this version anyway. It might be in that Japanese version, but you know, a horse is charging at him and he takes a sword to its legs or a spear to its legs. But yeah, clearly the trick was that the horse would be tripped with a rope or a wire or whatever to sort of make it fall. But also sometimes a lot of these horses have that ability to
they're trained to to
fold onto their knees,
roll kind of thing.
Yeah, like they fold onto their knees and roll over because they're trained. Their stunt horses are trained to do that. But like I said, horses have got really weak lower legs, haven't they? So you know, like even the slightest sort of fall or knock can sometimes break it beyond repair. So you don't want to see animals getting hurt and stuff like that. But Milius assures us that they were okay. So let's just take his word for it.
And actually, when you see some of the horse stunts, a lot of the stuntmen, the actors, are in real massive danger. There's a lot of points where they fall at the front legs of the horses just as the horses are, and it looks really, really dangerous.
It's terrifying looking.
So do you think there's any underlying messages or themes in this film, Martin?
Well, I mean, kind of, but not really.
Brute strength works every time.
I mean, it's a fairly straightforward hero's revenge tale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's thrust upon him. Again, that whole idea of the hero's mother and father are killed. He's got revenge on his mind, and it's a case of getting there however he can. He gets to the point where he thinks he's defeated them, and then, he's sent away with his tail between his legs, and he comes back even stronger with the help of, a wizened master, and faithful companions, all that kind of thing. So I don't think there's much in there in the way of symbolism. I think there's definite symbolism in the imagery, that they use, like the snake stuff like that. But I think that was just the idea of making the cult a very powerful image and symbol
people
throughout.
Naturally associate snakes with
evil
don't
and all
they?
that kind of stuff.
Slytherins.
Mm-hmm. You've got the ideas of the towers in the cities. They're these kind of pillars of hypnotism almost, where the people are scared of them. As soon as these snake towers appear, everybody sort of feels like under pressure and, very aware of the cult. That they're being looked, they're being viewed by these cult members. And there's there's a few modern parallels you could use there.
Definitely.
About watching people and spying on people and having this kind of ubiquitous presence where people are sort of scared to do anything in case they're being watched. But you could also even look at it as some kind of advertising board, like people are being hypnotized into believing this cult, because again that's what it is. He's trying to make this cult rise again, the snake cult rise again, because it's a dying breed. People are hypnotized, the young are corrupted, the innocent are corrupted, they're brought into their thrall.
They're made to drink honking soup with hands in it.
Well, they're made to kill themselves,
Oh, there's that as well.
They kill themselves, and then they're also cut up, they're basically used and abused for their pleasure. So you've got, again, this idea of, maybe like an Illuminati, if you're into all your conspiracy theories. These people that want to eat the souls of the young in order for them to stay, like vampires, what I mean? Then there's a couple of wee hints of things like that here and there, but I don't think there's any glaring symbolism that would be super important to take away from it.
It's not a particularly deep film.
No, I don't think so. There's deep cuts in it.
Boy, but it is an epic.
But it is an epic, yes. So what's your favourite scene in Conan the Barbarian? This will be interesting, actually, because you've only seen it the once.
I think there's definitely a couple. I think the two that stood out the most were the scene where James Earl Jones turns into a snake.
Yeah.
Again, I was really blown away by the effect, especially for the time period.
It's a wee bit Rick Baker-esque, actually, like the American Werewolf in London transformation.
Definitely is,
Just a wee bit.
definitely.
Anyway.
And also the moment when baby Conan loses his mum.
Yeah, I think that's one of the scenes that sticks with me. It's just such an amazing opening. It's really well composed, and it just sets the tone. You've got this brutal murder of the mother and father, and then you understand immediately that the only way he's ever going to get his revenge is if he does something similar, if he lives a similar life. So he's kind of doomed from that point onwards. That's all he's ever going to know is blood and pain and woe. And there's trees and wheels named after those things to remind him. But it's just like it sets the tone for his journey, and it's going to be a hard shift.
And you want revenge for him too.
You do, because they are really bad people.
Yep.
They're the worst of the worst, right down to the fact that they're eating other people. You find out at the very end. It doesn't get much worse than cannibalism.
But James Earl Jones does get his comeuppance, and he gets a good beheading, from Arnold Schwarzenegger. Again, it's pretty graphic.
It's pretty graphic, yeah. It's pretty graphic. I think James Earl Jones had a sort of a sheet or something around his neck.
Yeah, like Arnie was actually hacking at his neck.
Mm-hmm.
That is terrifying. But then I think the scene that really got me was when he flings his head down the epic staircase, and you actually hear this horrible sound as his head bounces down the stairs.
Even though it's a fake head, it just still makes you go, ow, ow, ow.
Oh, it's so disgusting.
As it bumps its way down the stairs, it's like, oh my God. Like, oh, his nose, oh, his eye, oh, ears. Oh. But I think my ultimate movie moment in this one, the beheading scene is great, but I think the speech about the riddle of steel between James Earl Jones and Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan, is just...
Flesh is stronger.
Steel is not strong, boy. Flesh is stronger. That's just so good. The script in this is amazing. I love the script. I love the mythology.
So grand.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally grand. It's like almost like way over the top.
Yeah. But
James Earl Jones sells it so well. Mm-hmm. And especially in that moment where he kind of like telling him about this riddle of steel. Schwarzenegger's like desperate. You killed my father. You took his sword. All this
Prepare
kind of stuff.
to die. He doesn't say that.
But yeah, I think that's my favourite scene. Me and my friends used to quote that ad infinitum just all the time. My friend Wilson, we just go on about it all the time. We even had a moment where we'd pick up a book. There's a Conan book on the shelf, and you just had to pick up the Conan book, open it at any page, put a finger on a line and say it and it would just sound like the most heavy metal thing ever. That you never failed. But yeah, that scene has just heavy metal all written all over it. It's so good, the riddle of steel. But yeah, I think that's my favourite. So the second film in our sword and sorcery double bill.
It's quite hard to say sword and sorcery.
As long as there's not sauce in it as well. Sword and
saucy sword and sorcery. I'm sure that's another category. We don't cover that category on this podcast.
I think that's the Scuddy version.
Yeah.
So the second film is Red Sonja. There's a bit of carryover in this film as well, isn't there? So
Sure
Sandal Bergman is in it again. She was Valeria in Conan, and she's Queen Gedren in this one.
She's the baddie.
She's the baddie. And you've also got Arnold Schwarzenegger, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Who's not playing Conan.
He is not Conan.
It's not Conan.
Not a Conan. Yeah, so Schwarzenegger's playing Calidor in this, who is basically Conan in all but name. You know, I don't know what the problem was. I think they were allowed to use the rights.
Yeah, they couldn't get the rights for the name, so they had to just make him like Conan without Conan.
Conan Light.
Yeah. It's like off-brand Conan. Yes. Generic Conan.
Sprinters crisps. As opposed to Walkers. But anyway, so Schwarzenegger makes an appearance in this again. So film was made in 1985. It was directed by Richard Fleischer, and it stars Bridget Nielsen, as we said. Mm-hmm. No, we didn't say. But Bridget Nielsen, Sandal Bergman, which we did say, Paul Smith, Ronald Lacey, and aforementioned Arnold Schwarzenegger. So you love this film, though, don't you? You absolutely love Red Sonja.
So while Martin was watching Conan for years, I was sitting at home watching Red Sonja. I totally grew up in this film. I was born in 1985, so you know, this was the Wonder Woman for my generation. So I grew up watching Sonja on her adventure across this crazy landscape. And I haven't seen the film for years and years and years, like maybe 25 years or something like that, and watched it again for the podcast. And it was a hella nostalgic event.
So the general story here is quite similar to Conan in a way. You know, mother and father are killed. Queen Gedren.
Evil Queen Gedren.
Yeah, she kills the family, burns the homestead, and Sonja is visited by Scathach. Is it Scathach, you say? But yeah, it's a Scottish warrior goddess, and she bestows powers upon young Sonja with the only request that she only lay with a man if he best her in combat.
So Sonja goes off to hone her swordsmanship or her swordswomanship, and then he proclaims her the master of the master and presents her with a new sword, or allows her to pick her sword just in the nick of time. Cue entry, stage left, non-Conan.
Non-Conan, it's not Conan.
Off-brand Conan enters, and he has the best line in a film ever, full of compassion. Your sister's dying. I'll take you to her. So in the background, Sonja's sister is a priestess charged... Varna. Charged with wearing a lot of white and gold. It's a really bold look. And charged with looking after the talisman. The talisman has the power to destroy the world in 13 days by storm and earthquake. I don't know what that accent was. They never used that accent in the film.
That was the bit. That was where Keira Knightley was in it.
So she wants this, so it's like a weapon of mass destruction that is powered by candles. So it's like the really accessible weapon. So she takes this, and then she sort of is laying siege to the lands. So Sonja sets out on her mission to destroy the talisman and save the world.
Yes. Like any good heroine should.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I would have done it with that particular haircut, but it was the 80s.
Yeah, the haircut is fabulous. So yeah, this was the third film really in this kind of barbarian trilogy. It was supposed to, obviously, as we've said, we've already laboured the point a little bit, it was supposed to be Conan, but it turned out to be Red Sonja, and it was a female lead. There's some continuity as far as the visuals are concerned, and obviously some of the actors, but the tone is completely different. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we already talked about Conan being a very serious tone, you know, it's quite grim and dark, but Sonja is definitely much more light-hearted. You can see that they're kind of going more for a family audience,
definitely,
even though some of the violence on display here is still pretty hefty.
Mm-hmm. And even like what happens at the start, I never picked up on that when I was a child, that she was actually viciously attacked. She turned down the advances of the evil queen, who wanted her as like a kind of consort.
Yeah.
And then that was why she was actually raped by her men. And I did not pick up on that at all as a child. So watching it again as an adult, that was a little bit.
I think that's one of the things about it is it's got conflicting tones, because you've got those really serious aspects, but the music in particular as well, like, makes it sound almost like a kid's comedy.
Definitely.
Like, this is definitely not Ennio Morricone's best work.
No.
I mean, the Sonja theme is quite upbeat and quite memorable. We've been whistling it all weekend. Yeah, so I mean, that's a terrible rendition of it, but it's quite memorable.
Yeah.
But it seems quite happy and upbeat.
It's very galloping horses across landscape.
It's that kind of thing. But then there's a lot of moments in this film where it's just like really silly sounding Mickey Mousing and all that kind of thing, and it doesn't really sound like a serious score at all. It's almost like he was phoning it in here.
It's almost like they got Morricone, but they got him again. They got budget Conan, and then they maybe got like a cut price version of Morricone where he was like, right, I've done you this really awesome riff, but that's all you're getting. So they just hammered that all the way through the film. What's happening now? Doot, 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 doot. So yeah, it's really overdone. Yeah, it's overdone. I think there was a lot of problems behind the scenes on this film. The cinematographer, Giuseppe Rotono, he didn't speak any English, and the director, Richard Fleischer, didn't speak any Italian. Oh dear. And I think the first unit director was a Spaniard, so he was kind of mediating between the two. And apparently Richard Fleischer's like quite particular about the way he does things. He doesn't really change his mind, and maybe wasn't so keen on the sharing the creative process, so I think there was a lot of times where the communication was lost and both of them had kind of conflicting ideas of what the other one wanted. You can't really tell too much as far as the way the film's put together is concerned. But you can tell that there's definitely issues behind the scenes with this film. Like I said, there's like a clash of tonalities a little bit as well. And I don't know whether that was just like seeping in through the whole production where, people weren't really sure exactly what they were working on. We've seen one of the behind the scenes documentaries where one of the art directors, I think, said that as well, but he wasn't really sure what was going on. And he felt like there was just too many voices and nobody was listening to the other person, and Schwarzenegger was in and out of the production. He initially was only supposed to be there for 10 days and ended up being there for a couple of weeks. And I think he's as soon as Bridget Nielsen's scenes were shot, there was a few more scenes with Schwarzenegger shot, and he's kind of, his part started to grow. I think his ego was also growing as well at this point, and he was just trying to make sure it was a good vehicle for him, and he was always shown in the best light. Maybe he didn't want to be upstaged by a woman in it, that kind of thing. I don't know if that was the case, but it certainly seemed like he wasn't happy being a second in this. He was only supposed to be a co-star, and clearly Bridget Nielsen was the star, and he maybe wasn't enjoying it. I mean, he gets top billing in this film. I think his name appears massively bigger than Bridget Nielsen's. And I think his cut as well, I think he earned a massive amount more than her, which, is something that's still going on in Hollywood today. It is. I mean, money in the name talks. Yeah. There's no doubt that Schwarzenegger's name attached to it meant that it maybe get more eyeballs than it probably would have. And she was a no-name actress at this point. She wasn't even an actress. She hadn't been in any films. Yeah. This was an introducing Bridget Nielsen. Exactly. And actually, it really was introducing her, because that's not her name. So she was actually born Gita Nielsen. This introduced her new stage name, Bridget Nielsen. Right, Bridget Nielsen, that's where it came from, I see. So Sandahl Bergman was actually originally cast to play the heroine. Yeah, that's right. Red Sonja, but she actually decided that she would rather play the baddie. Yeah. So she didn't want to be typecast, and she wanted to explore a different kind of role. Yeah. Which left them without a heroine for a little while. It was actually quite close to the start of filming that they managed to track down Bridget Nielsen. Yeah, was it not 6 weeks or something? Like that? It was super close, like scarily close. And she had to sort of put all the work in with the swords and all these kind of things as well. That's a hell of a timeline to try and get ready for something like this. But the thing is, she looks great in it. I think she looks really, really good with the sword. Like, again, the web of death, all those things, those fancy moves that you do with the sword. I think she looks really competent. And she's also another very tall lady. I think she's 6'1". She's an absolute tree. So another Valkyrie, an Amazonian. And she really looks the part in this film. As an interesting aside,
one of the crew was talking about how Dino De Laurentiis, the producer, would sometimes ask women to get plastic surgery to change their appearance in order to fit with their profile of the actual character they're supposed to be portraying. But he said in this case that he didn't ask Brigitte to make any changes. I think that's crazy though.
That's
that he
horrific,
would actually
isn't
ask
it?
people to alter their bodies.
And that people
order
would
to,
feel the pressure to do that.
Exactly, especially younger women like herself. She was only 21, I think, wasn't she? And you know, if he had have asked her to make some changes to her body, I'm quite sure she probably would have, just to get the part. You never know. I mean, she might have been strong enough to say, no, it's okay, I'll just stick with my modelling job. But, you know, you're given a big break in Hollywood and Arnold Schwarzenegger's going to be your co-star. It'd be a hard one to turn down. But again, that's another aspect of producers using their power.
I guess also it's kind of hard to fit in cosmetic surgery in a 6-week time frame, so maybe that was on her side.
Well, that's also there as well.
But she does have that physique, you know, she's very tall, she's athletic, so she already had that look.
Yeah, like I said, I think she handles the action scenes really well in this. And yeah, she's a little bit wooden, but again, you can forgive it simply because it is her first role, you know, first time she's ever been in a film, first time she's really been in front of cameras in that way, and she's under so much pressure.
She's also delivering lines in not her mother tongue, you know, she's working in a different language, and
exactly.
As a youngster, I never noticed how wooden some of her line delivery was.
Yeah.
I definitely see it now. And, you know, some parts of the film are much better than others. But when you consider that, she's working in another language, then you can understand why some of the tonality might be off a little bit.
Yeah. So we have Arnold Schwarzenegger as Calidor, and as I said in the intro, he's not in it very much.
No, he's not.
He just kind of flits in and out, just really to sort of lop some heads off.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, he's there just to sell the movie with his big name, really. So he's there at the start. He kind of creeps about a couple of times in between. He's there kind of keeping an eye on things and just making sure that the talisman is safely destroyed.
Yeah, that's right. He's actually supposed to be the prince, isn't he? That's supposed to be there.
Lord Calidor.
Oh, he's Lord Calidor, isn't he? So Lord Calidor's supposed to be there to sort of make sure it gets destroyed. So he's got quite an important part in it, but yeah, as far as the film itself goes, he sort of flits in and out of the narrative. It doesn't really just pop up to save her bacon, because most of the times he's there, she doesn't really need the help. You know, there's maybe only the one part when she fights Breitag, which is Pat Roach. Breitag. He's got that West Country accent.
He's brilliant.
He's been in so many films as a stunt double. You know, he was a wrestler, a British wrestler. He's got a really kind of weird career. Starts off in British wrestling, then he's in stuff like Indiana Jones movies. He was in Conan the Destroyer as well. But yeah, he's in this as Breitag, and she obviously beats him, and then she's going to have to sort of fend off all of his sort of fishmen.
Yeah, I don't know what
these
their
guys
costumes
have all got.
are all about. I think there was a job lot on another costume, and they were like, "We'll take them."
Maybe there was like the filming something to do with Atlantis next door or something, you know. And they actually look like the Trench from Aquaman.
They do.
But yeah, he pops up in that point, you know, he kills a few people and lets her escape. But yeah, he's just really poorly used in this. They have this moment where Sonja, as we've said before, Sonja can only lay with a man who has bested her in combat, and they have their fight. They have two fights, obviously. Well, the first one's a fight where they sort of fight to a standstill and they draw. I don't think Schwarzenegger wants to be beaten in that either.
No.
Because again, even though he's not Conan, maybe Conan you can understand it, like he's supposed to be this great warrior. But this guy's Calidor, we don't even know who he is.
No.
You know, he's just a lord from a far off land, but he's coming at it thinking he is Conan, so he's not going to be beaten, you know.
Exactly.
So yeah, I don't think he wanted to be beaten in that moment. So yeah, they fight to a draw, and I think the second time towards the end, they just kind of submit to each other, you know. They've just realised that it's fine. Let's just not fight. Let's just do it.
Oh my. I definitely didn't get that when I was a child.
But yeah, it's hard to gauge his performance in this. He's Conan. He doesn't say much, does a fair bit of action. He looks actually much more comfortable with the sword.
Yeah.
Does his action scenes really well.
I think as well he actually looks more comfortable on scene. Like he seems to...
He's been in a bunch of films at this point, you know. He's done a couple of Conan films for a start. He's done Terminator. He's done a bunch of stuff, so should be second nature to him by now. And also the fact that he's the most experienced on set would give him that kind of ego as well. He'd be super confident about it, you know. He doesn't like it though. I mean, I've seen that wee extra video, and he says he hates it. He
hates Red Sonja.
Yeah, he says he thinks it's the worst film he's ever made. But it's easy for actors to sort of spit on it from a distance and say, I hated that, I wasn't involved in it, you know, I didn't really care about it, and blah blah blah.
Green Lantern.
At the time, it's clear that he wanted to have as big a part as he could possibly get in it. You know, he was actually like there sort of making sure he was more scene and more scenes, and he wasn't going to be
forgotten.
He wasn't going to be shown up or forgotten by having a lady in the front,
a no-name lady.
Exactly. So I think he took it more seriously at the time, but now it's easy to look back and say I didn't really care about it.
I think he's probably matured a lot over the years.
I think so, and he's made his money off it as well. Like, I don't think we're making him any more cash at the moment, but he's definitely made his money. So the rest of the cast, the rest of the good guys, you've got Ernie Reyes Jr. He's an amazing martial artist.
He is so good in this film. Some of his little set pieces that he does, and some of his sword play and his kicks, he's really good. Yeah, I mean,
he's adorable. Like, and again, that's kind of like speaking to the tone that they're going for. Clearly they were going for like a more kid-friendly market. Yeah. If they could, again, some of the violence belies that. It's kind of weird what they were going for, but clearly having a kid in there is just so that they could like attach themselves to that market, that demographic, and try and draw those viewers in. But he was like a career martial artist, as you can see. Even then, when he was a kid, like, he was extremely good.
He's got mad skills.
He was like in the Ninja Turtles movie. He was one of the Turtles. I think it was maybe Leonardo or Donatello, one of the two. And he has this amazing fight with The Rock in a film called Welcome to the Jungle. It's also called The Rundown. You should check that out. It's so funny. It's so uber violent and ridiculous and over the top, but he's amazing in it. I think he was maybe even like a kickboxing or forms or something champion, in America. But he's a really, really amazing martial artist. And again, maybe not the greatest actor.
No, definitely. But he's a child.
He's all about
the
physical.
Forgive it.
But I mean, even as an adult, he's not fabulous.
Okay.
As a physical specimen, even as a child, he was just very, very good. And I think it's a good turn in this. I mean, he's cute, he's adorable. He's got a wee character arc.
And he's supposed to be a little asshole.
Well, that's it. Like, he develops into.
He develops humility through Sonja's coaching. After she puts him over his knee and goes to give him a spanking. Yeah, I love it. And then he's got his faithful sort of butler type, his Alfred, and that's Falcon. I want a Falcon.
Yeah, so Falcon's played by Paul Smith. He's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he's just got so much to do to look after this sort of young upstart. And then he always sees the good in it. He's always worried about him. He's like this kind of
anything for that little kid.
He's almost like a mother and a father mixed into one. Yeah, he's like the kind of all-in-one nanny, pretty much. But he adds out a little bit of a level of levity to it as well, He's also supposed to be a funny character. He's clearly supposed to be a comedy character in this.
But he's also probably one of the better actors.
Yeah, I think he's maybe the best actor of the bunch. I mean, I think aside from Ronald Lacey, who is one of the sort of dark wizards in the Queen Gedron's horde. I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. But anyway, so Ronald Lacey, who was in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He was the famous Nazi that gets the symbol burned into his hand. Heil Hitler. But he's really good in this. And again,
he does a good creepy guy.
He does, and you can tell he's a step up. And as far as acting talent's concerned, and again, I think the same for Paul Smith, it's acting talent is the kind of step up in class, even from Schwarzenegger, who's supposed to be your star. And I think moving on to the actual villain of the piece, Sandal Bergman, I really don't think she does herself any favours in this. I think she's pretty terrible.
Oh, did you not like her?
I just think she's quite bad. I don't know. I just don't know what it is about it. I don't like the way she does anything in this.
Do you think she was trying too hard to be a baddie?
Possibly. I think it is just a wee bit too over the top.
She definitely comes across a little bit like pantomime witch.
Well, that's exactly it. It's really super theatrical.
Yeah, and I think maybe for me, when as a child watching it, that's the kind of character I was used to. I was used to the witches in Disney films and things like that. So, I guess I had a different perspective on it.
It was almost like Evelyn from like Masters of the Universe, that kind of thing, like just completely over the top.
And also, I really liked the character though, in terms of like that gold mask.
The design was good.
Cool.
I really liked that. I liked that Sonja had scarred her. I know that's one of these kind of classic tropes that you get, where even in like Ninja Turtles, remember? Oroku Taki gets clawed by Hamato Yoshi early on, and it's like this thing that lives with him for the rest of his life. And I like that idea, that she'd have something to remember her by, and there's a kind of connection there between the two always. I like all that, but there was scenes where she was sitting in the chair, like in the throne room, and she's actually like dancing on her toes and her feet and bouncing around, and it looks so silly. It's like she just needed a bit more poise. But like you said, I think all it was she was just trying too hard to be evil. Yeah. rather than just being a bad person and having bad intentions and thinking negatively and
she went
bringing
more
that to the
hysterical.
character. Exactly. She just went a little bit too far beyond. And the fact that she's up against a no-name actress at this point in Bridget Nielsen, who's not very strong, acting skills are not very strong yet, I think their confrontations then end up feeling really wooden and kind of, they don't
bit
really
soulless.
work very well. Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, going back to the production itself, I think that's what one of those guys said. It said the whole production felt a little bit soulless and a little bit empty, and like no one was either taking it seriously or really knew what was going on. Or just kind of earning their money and leaving.
I think it must be really hard as well if the director isn't able to communicate their sort of vision. It must be really difficult for people to become invested in the roles and the characters and really buy into it, and then that makes it difficult for them to sell it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the high points, though, is, again, the set design. I think this time it was Danilo Donati. He was Fellini's set director. You know what I mean? So that's crazy. And he also did Flash Gordon, we talked about recently. Well, I did a podcast on it. I did a video podcast on it. But yeah, he's an amazing set designer, production designer, and he carries over a lot of the visual elements from the original Conan movie still. There's a scale to everything.
Yeah.
You've got all those kind of beasts, like their skeletons make bridges and houses and all this kind of thing, and you can tell that this is a land of fantasy, and there's beasts and beings that you've never seen, and it makes you wonder what's going on here. So I love all that idea, and I think it was a great use also of matte paintings again as well. For certain sequences we've got the sort of
the chasm that they've got to cross over.
The chasm they have to cross over, and they've got the lava at the bottom of it, and that's just all a big painting and stuff.
And again, when I was younger, I had no idea.
Yeah.
To me, Sonja was on the edge of a lava pit and had to cross the skeleton bridge.
Yeah, there's some great model work in there as well. Like you've got people on horseback in the foreground, and they're coming up to the castle, and it's a model. And you're blending mats in the background and all these kind of things. And again, a lot of the technicians on set talked about how difficult it was to actually blend all of these things together. And again, because there was lack of communication, they found it difficult to match colour and what exactly the director was looking for on certain shots as far as the light and the colour was concerned. So yeah, again, there's a lot of things that maybe could have been a lot better, and I think if there was more synergy between the cast and crew, this might have turned out to be something on a par with Conan. But I think as it was, it's barely saved by the kind of kitsch, fun humour of it, and being a product of its time and something that I grew up with. I can still look back at it fairly fondly, but it's difficult to see past a lot of its flaws looking at it from a more technical perspective.
And another one of the technical things that maybe hasn't stood the test of time is the giant spider in the throne room. That is potentially the worst animatronic I've ever seen in anything ever.
I don't even think it's an animatronic. I think it's just a puppet.
With like legs just flailing everywhere, and it
someone
doesn't even know what way it's facing, and
yeah,
that just looks pretty bad. Yeah,
none of its legs even touch the ground. Its body's on the ground and the legs are just like kind of wobbling all over the place. But that then, if this was a kid's film, that's the kind of thing that you would think was funny and you would go with it. But because this is supposed to be kind of like a serious sword and sorcery movie, it's the kind of thing that takes you right out of it. It's like, my God, what's that thing?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, there's visual elements that I think maybe referenced Excalibur and a bunch of the other sword and sorcery epics that had just been made around about the 80s and stuff like that. So, but I just don't think it was fully realised to its potential. So we talked a little bit about Bridget Nielsen's performance in this and about her sword work in particular. It was really impressive, as we said. And I just seen another part of the documentary where it talked about Vic Armstrong, who was the stunt director, choreographer, who trained a lot of the actors. And it's funnily enough, he shot at 22 frames per second instead of 24.
Oh, does that make it
Makes it a bit faster? Yeah, so the actors could maybe take it a little bit easier, and then this would make it look faster.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, that's really a good idea, that. So I think it's really convincing because a lot of the impacts look like they make good contact.
They do.
What we talked about in the Conan episode, there's some times where it can look like they've pulled back a little bit and it doesn't make as much contact. In this one, they definitely look like they're hitting each other.
And I think the end sequence, the fight scene at the end between Gedrin and Sonja looks really good. They're in this. Yeah. The image is really nice as well. They're in the room where they've been keeping the talisman, so there's candles
everywhere. That's a great set,
it looks fantastic. Yeah. And the two women physically match each other. They're both around 6 foot, although you don't necessarily see that because they're both a similar size. Yeah. And it's a great fight scene to watch.
Yeah. You can tell it's been sped up in that. That's the only sequence where you can tell like it looks a little bit odd, a little bit
Yeah.
off and unnatural, because it is just at a slightly faster.
It's also really weird. I noticed just when we watched it recently that there's no music really at that point. So you hear the swords and you hear like this like feet on stones and swords on candles and things like that.
Yeah.
But there's not really any music in the background, and I
Yeah.
don't know how I feel about how that affects that particular scene.
Yeah.
Like,
As I say, I think Morricone was phoning it in at this point. Like, I don't think he was super interested. I think he had a couple of themes that he wanted to use, you know, like heroes themes almost, and they are quite memorable, like we said. But the rest of it is just fairly trashy. I don't think he was giving a shit.
and
like,
they
he
really
just
don't
threw
go
anything at it.
anywhere. The themes,
Yeah, they
you know,
don't,
there's
they
no
don't,
real
they don't.
transformation. There's no
No.
kind of there's no character themes. There's no like, oh, we're happy
Well,
now.
yeah, I think Sonja's definitely got a character theme, and I think the Prince and Falcon maybe have a little bit. Maybe Calidor's, I can't really remember off the top of my head, but I think there's a few themes in there.
Okay.
But Sonja's is definitely the most memorable of all of them, and it's possible that the majority of their themes are just like references to hers.
Yeah.
It's all the filler. It's all the extra parts, and the only reason it stood out is because it was so bad. You know, it sounded comedic, and it really didn't fit with what you're looking at. Again, if it was a kids' TV show or a kids' movie, you could say that's fine. That's the tone they're going for, but you've got this terrible blend of, you know, what's happening on the screen seems more adult, and then the music is giving it a more sort of jovial feeling, and it just didn't work.
It kind of reminds me of the Holy Grail, when they're like, you know how they're bit with the coconuts when they're like it's almost like that would be quite good with that.
It's a perfect tune, actually. Yes, Patsy riding along. Yeah. So what's your favourite moment in Red Sonja?
So I spoke about it before, but definitely I think that fight scene at the end, with the two women facing off.
I think I would go with that as well. It's a really, really good set, as we talked about. It's a really good set. It's got cool atmosphere. The candles all over the place, and you've got that green globe in the middle. And as you said earlier, they're perfectly matched combatants, and it just works really well as a set piece. And both of them look really accomplished at what they're doing, you know. So they carry it off really well, albeit with that sort of cheeky wee technique that Vic Armstrong used to shoot it. But yeah, I think that's probably the best scene in the movie.
I think visually as well, the other scene that I really like is that scene in the temple near the start when you get the overhead of the priestesses pointing their swords in. Yeah,
there's a little bit of a round table moment in there again, maybe a reference to Excalibur. And the other thing that reminded me of was Zack Snyder's Justice League.
100%.
Well, it's a different cut obviously now, but there's definitely a part in Zack's cut where Steppenwolf arrives in the temple in Themyscira and he fights the Amazons with his parademons, and that sequence in there looked very, very similar to where the mother box is being held, and and the talisman's pretty much in the same place, and it's right in the centre of the room, and you know, when they come in and try to steal it.
And obviously the Amazonians try to bash away the supports to block entry.
That's right.
So it's a kind of similar thing, like they're the protectors. These badass females are the protectors of this powerful talisman. They're
tasked to just die there. So yeah, it was really funny that I don't know if Zack took any influence from Red Sonja.
I think we all take a little bit of influence from Red Sonja.
But there's a possibility, you know, the setup might have been influential rather than the actual elements or whatever. Maybe just like all of that idea of this temple that's being protected by women, and these, you know, beasts come in to try and take something. So you never know.
So, out of our two sword and sorcery, I still can't say it, out of our two sword and sorcery epics, which one comes out on top for you?
Well, I think it's an easy one. It's Conan for me. Like, you could probably hear from my the way I was talking about Red Sonja that I don't love it. I enjoy it, you know, but again, on a technical level and as a film, and you know, the actors and the way things are all sort of carried off, it falls well short of Conan the Barbarian. You know, they've got DNA that they share, you know, there's connective tissue there.
Shared universe
kind of thing. But Conan's definitely the stronger film of the two. What about you?
Well, before this podcast and before we watched Conan, I would have definitely said Sonja. And I did love this film growing up. It was a little bit harder to watch. It was very nostalgic. And I was very surprised that I retained so much of the dialogue after all these years. But yeah, I can definitely see the flaws in it. And I was really pleasantly surprised by Conan the Barbarian. Yeah,
Conan's solid. You know, there's things that you can look back and say, oh, that could maybe be done better nowadays and stuff. But there's very few goofs, continuity errors. You know, there's a real sort of unique vision in there. It's a strong vision. It's really well written and well acted.
Fabulous score. Epic sets.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful.
It's really good. It's one of the best fantasy films ever made, I think. So that about wraps it up for our episode on sword and sorcery films. Conan the Barbarian, Red Sonja. Thoroughly enjoyed watching both of these again and had a good laugh with you as well.
Let us know which was your favourite, and if you would like to follow us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Just search for Dickard's Unicorn.
We've also got our YouTube channel where I review movies and TV shows, so head over there and check that out if you're so inclined. But thanks once again for listening to this podcast. Your support is really appreciated. We just found out that we're way over 200 downloads now, so that was more than we expected at this point. So
Thanks, Mum, if that was you.
Shauna's mum's responsible for 200 downloads. But yeah, thank you so much for the support. It really means a lot, and we're glad you're getting a wee kick out of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And if you feel like leaving us a wee kind review, we'd really appreciate it.
Once again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Until then, we're off to solve the riddle of steel.